We are back on a Tuesday evening live with my guy Jeff Hunt from the Off the Ball Network. Last week we unveiled our Ohio State end of year grades for the Ohio State offense. Today it's our end of year grades for the Ohio State defense. Last week a little lighthearted. Today the temperature gets turned up. Sit back, relax, get your pen and paper out, follow along as we hand out our grades. Hopefully you enjoy giving us some grades of your own right here on Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Tuesday, January 11th in the year 2022, and my guy, Jeff Hunt, is with us. And Jeff, today's show, as my phone is a little bit late, is brought to us by NetSuite. NetSuite is the number one cloud financial system to power your growth. Head to netsuite.com/lockedonncaa for special end-of-year financing on the number one financial system for growing businesses. We powered through that little debacle, but Jeff Hunt's back with us. And Jeff, man, grades are here. Report card time. We're both now professors handing out grades for the Ohio State defense. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. We did the offense last week, and that was a good time. We basically got to play, everybody's favorite substitute teacher, and give everybody a great grade for the year, and have a little fun. It's a little tougher this week. I felt a little tough, but I had to be honest, and we'll see how we match up with this. But let's just be, the Ohio State defense didn't have its best season. I'll start with that.
It did not. The offense was marveled. Number one in some categories statistically in college football. The defense, it was not pretty at times. It was not the best at times. We've heard about how players should step up. Some did not. Some wowed us by the way that Denzel Burke, true freshman corner, stepped in game number one against Minnesota and was a bright spot on this defense. My initial thought with this defense, though, is not only was it the youth, but I don't think they even had the personnel that we're used to seeing for an Ohio State defense. And so all year long, we heard schematics, scheme, coaching. At some point, you got to realize when it comes to an elite defense in college football, the players that we had this year just weren't up to par to be players on an elite defense. And we saw that not just game one against Minnesota, but even in game number 13 against Utah.
Oh, it was all season long. That was one of my notes, especially the linebacker category. It's like, how do you critique? Did we even have any actual linebackers? Like, everybody felt out of position. It was the defensive line felt like they had three guys that should be playing the same position. Defensive backs, the injuries. I mean, Proctor and Seven Banks. Proctor's out most of the season. Seven Banks is, felt like, I don't know. I think what he played 3 or 4 games. I can't quite remember. And then he was up and down when he did play, so injuries, you factor that in. Obviously, apologies to everybody that tried, really didn't have a true deep safety, all season. It was the personnel wise, it's a little disappointing too, because we hear all, every year, all summer, all winter, the next year, these recruiting classes coming in, blah, blah, blah. And you can't even put, we recently watched the national championship game, and I really looked, and I was like, how many defensive players for Ohio State could play for Georgia or Alabama on defense? And I don't know if there is one. And I'm being honest. So if we're going to put ourselves in that elite team category, which we are, absolutely, Ohio State deserves to be in that top 5 powerhouse category, and you don't have defenders year in and year out that are NFL prospects and guaranteed first rounders and stuff like that, it's a huge red flag to me.
A major red flag. Defensive line, linebackers, defensive backs. A few less positions on this on the defense in general. So it gives us a little bit more time to go into and dive into what our grades are, why we have given that grade for that position group. D-line, linebackers, DBs. I want to go first with the defensive line. Jeff, I'm looking at some stats here quickly, and I'm just going to go through something here. We get down to, I think, the first defensive lineman I see here as far as numbers-wise, Tyreek Smith, 26 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks on the season. He did have 2 pass breakups. Zach Harrison, 25 tackles, 6 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, only 2 sacks. So your two starting defensive ends. I'm going to stop there. I can keep going. It's going to get quite embarrassing. Your 2 starting defensive ends. Zach Harrison, 3 sacks. No, Tyreek Smith, 3 sacks. Zach Harrison, 2 sacks. 11 combined tackles for loss. That's not up to par. The defensive line, to me, I'm giving a D+. I was not expecting going into the season to give them a D+. I was considering giving them a C-. But when I look at the top of the stat sheet, I know a lot of fans will look at this even 20 years down the line to see how the 2021 season went. Rose Bowl champions. Oh, they must have been great. Okay, so your leading tackler is a safety defensive back in your bullet and Ronnie Hickman. Your third leading tackler is Bryson Shaw, with 59 tackles, who's a free safety, who's your backup free safety. So the 2 guys that are primarily the back half of the secondary are your top 3 or 2 of your top 3 leading tacklers. That's an indictment on the defensive line. Running game, yes, they had a good running game, but a lot of times it was because they could slow the running game down early of the opposition, and the opponent had to throw the ball a lot. I really wonder if Michigan State didn't get a big lead. I mean, if Ohio State didn't get a big lead against Michigan State, and Kenneth Walker III was able to get loose every now and then, I wonder how that game would have gone. D+. Yes, D as in dog, D+ for the D-line of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Jeff and I don't share our grades prior to doing shows, so I'm curious where he gave the Ohio State defensive line.
No, I like that. And we're our grades are different here, but we're on the same page. The first note I had, wrote here in front of me was Haskell Garrett led the team with only 7 tackles for loss, and that's that's your interior defensive lineman. But for the whole season, 7 tackles for loss. I mean, that's there's players that honestly, there's players that get that almost in a game or two. Like just really, really disappointing when you look at that. The sacks just weren't there this year. That was my thing. The defensive line just could not get to the quarterback this year and harass them. And they even got pushed around in a couple games. I'll put that on there. Now, I was much kinder to him than you. I gave him a straight C right down the middle because I thought that I guess I gave him a lot of credit because without them, it would have been worse because of how bad I thought the linebacking crew was. Not to tip my hat yet. So I gave him a C. They did have a couple games to where they had 2 or 3 games to where they really did deflect. They were in the face of the quarterback. They deflected some passes. They actually looked like a decent, defensive line and got some pressure. They had other games like the Michigan game where they looked really bad and got pushed around. The Rose Bowl without Garrett, was a huge hit. So basically I gave him a straight C because they kind of were big and got in the way, and they really the run numbers weren't bad against them. And for everything you said though, but I still got to give him credit because again, I told you if I'm a Ohio State defender, I'd look at me and go, hey, we weren't that bad. That's kind of how I thought about it. But now that you kind of bring up teams had to start throwing, so it takes away from the run numbers. And I think about Minnesota, I probably would have put a minus behind the C, but I'll stick with it, a C for the defensive line. A shaky C, a kind C.
I was up in the air about giving him a C-. And guys, we're here live with Locked On Buckeyes Live, part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on a Tuesday evening with Jeff Hunt from the Off the Ball Network. I was up in the air, Jeff, about giving them a C- or D+. And it's all because I understand you have inexperience at free safety. You have a new guy playing a new position in Ronnie Hickman. I understand that at linebacker, they couldn't really they were getting a lot of the heat for the linebacker play, but the linebackers are all getting rotated, it seems like, every play. And even the ones that were playing more consistently, like you mentioned earlier, are they really up to par to be starting linebackers? I don't know. I have no idea. But one thing I did see was there was consistency at times, but in big moments, there wasn't the consistency that you would like to see. Setting the edge was a problem. Was it defensive ends? Was it outside linebackers, depending on the play and formation? That's okay. We could debate that all day. Yes, this was the defensive end's responsibility. It was the outside linebackers' responsibility. But one thing I also see with this team was the leadership at that position. I, who? Who's the leader? Like, I'm looking at Zach Harrison. I'm looking at Tyreek Smith. I'm looking at Haskell Garrett. I know Teron Vincent and Antoine Jackson have been around for a while, but they have not gotten the run. Haskell Garrett, All-American, opted out of the Rose Bowl. Okay, that was his decision. That's a leadership type of role that you did. Olave opted out and led in a different way than Haskell Garrett did at that time. I get it. I completely understand. But I went with D+ because take the numbers aside, there was a reason why they played so many guys on defense. And I think not only was it the personnel that they had, I think also nobody really stepped up.
Yeah.
If you take away all of the recruiting rankings, just look at Ohio State's defensive line, how they played. Outside of Haskell Garrett stepping up occasionally, nobody stepped up. Nobody was consistent. That's why that's a big reason the linebackers and secondary looked like they did, because nobody stepped up up front. Think about, it's so rare to me that Denzel Burke, not only a true freshman, played as well as he did, but that with the defensive line that didn't get any pass rush at all, he was able to flourish on the outside. That's unheard of. D+ to me, yes, it's harsh. I want to be nicer. But unfortunately, based off what my eyes showed me, I can't be.
Yeah, I mean, you saw what you saw out there, yeah, and to springboard off that again, the young guys didn't pop off. Now I know that they're, Sawyer's coming in, without a season of high school football. I mean, I get that they were behind. JTT comes in at the last minute, but even by the end of the year, that typical like spark, that jump, that explosion that we expected out of what we're told are some of the best players in the country, we just didn't see. There was development issues, which is crazy to say to a Larry Johnson defensive line. Like you say, there's, guys just didn't live up to like full potential. No explosion, no game wreckers out there. It's just, it was a really odd season. And again, it's part of being a spoiled Ohio State fan. We are used to having guys that really wreak havoc on the edge.
Jeff, D+ for myself for the defensive line, a C for you for the defensive line. Linebackers, this one's interesting. Because the only guy that I heard that really jumped off the screen all year was still Chambers. And then the biggest game of the year, it's all of a sudden Tommy Eichenberg show. Oh, also for this show, and also for how Ohio State does their defensive assignment, Ronnie Hickman is a defensive back. He is not a linebacker. So you may say, Jay, he's the bullet. He's a hybrid. Yes, but in this hybrid situation, he is a defensive back, just like when he's going to the field coaching, he is with a defensive back secondary warming up and in that film room as well. Let's go back to the stat sheet very quickly, only because this is a great way for a lot of people that did not stay up to par with the season to see how Ohio State played. Second leading tackler on the team, Tommy Eichenberg, 64 tackles, six and a half tackles for loss. He did have an interception. He had 2 pass breakups and 1 fumble recovery. Cody Simon, 54 tackles. Still Chambers, remember the bright spot, 47 tackles. Cody Simon had 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Still Chambers for 5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Taraja Mitchell, a captain, also didn't play in the Rose Bowl, I don't believe, got hurt, had a knee injury, but he did start to lose his position towards the end of the season as the season progressed. Taraja Mitchell, 45 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 0 sacks. That's the only numbers he had on the stat sheet officially. Keep going down. Got to go quite a ways down to get to somebody else. And I'm going to stop right there because I'm just not going to listen to anybody. Cade Kashersky, 11 tackles. He's a walk-on linebacker. Cade Stover played. This is what is alarming. Cade Stover played 1 game at linebacker, 11 tackles, 0.5 sacks, and he played 1 game on defense.
One game.
Yes, he was tied at 25, number 24 for most tackles on the team.
Oh.
That's alarming. As bad as the defensive line was to me, they can only be so they're amazing when they're amazing and they help other players. If they play bad, the linebackers in secondary, they are normally exposed in big ways for that. Linebackers, I'm going with a D. Now you may say, Jay, why are you going to go with the D line, a D+? Linebackers a D. Mainly because they could, if the defensive linemen are not even hitting the offensive lineman and the O lineman is getting a free release to the linebackers, that's not on the linebacker. I mean, think about it. Still Chambers is what, 6'2", 230, and an offensive guard in college in the Big Ten, 6'3", 6'4", 300 pounds, 310, maybe 315. There's not much he can do with that. Like, that's just not math. That's common sense. There's not much he can do with that. The linebacker play, though, I'm starting to wonder, Jeff, if the 4-2-5 this year transferring to that was not only a move Ryan Day wanted to make, but because he knew he did not have three good linebackers to play on the field. I could have easily gone D minus and been justified in doing that because nobody really played well at this time, at this point during the season. And as I've already started some preseason look at next year's depth chart, I don't know if we have a starting linebacker on the team right now. I mean, we have a guy coming from Arizona State, played running back, transfers here. He's going to be a linebacker. Cade Stover is he outside? I mean, we have no idea what's going on. The linebackers were not up to par. This is an indictment, not just against the players, but against the coaches, because player development was lacking this year.
Yeah, and it was from game one. I mean, it was the Minnesota
Yeah.
game. I mean, not to pick on him, but Corey Simon makes the big misread and gives up, the touchdown. Just it was from game one, and we've talked about it all year. A lot of these tackles are downfield too. Like these are
Yes.
after 5-yard runs and after 4-yard runs and things like that. They weren't aggressive tackles. They were none of the linebackers. I'll go so far as to say really knew how to play the edge of the defense. Like it was unbelievable. Like we came off last year with Pete Werner, who's one of the smarter linebackers. I mean he's making it in the NFL right now, and he just understood the outside edge there. He's limited a little bit physically, but he was so smart and knew what to do out there. Broke some things up this year. That's not there. They're trying to. And with the 4-2-5, I understand that's different. It's not the same defense, but still like recognition. Again, watch that national championship game, both sides of the ball, both teams, watch the linebackers and how they read and, how they get off blocks and, wrong, just their techniques and everything to be a part of the play, force guys back inside, all the little things. And these linebackers just were not up to the task. It was a rough season. I gave the linebackers a D also.
Wow.
And I'll just be straight up. The reason they didn't get an F is because that the team had a good season. I'm just being honest. Like they did enough to get in the way. Simon, they took turns. Like Simon had a couple games to where I'm like, okay, we're getting it early in the season. Mitchell, I'm like, okay, this is a guy that's, by the end of the season, Chambers flashed a little, like he started getting a little explosive, a little aggressive in some games. You're like, yes, but it was so sporadic. But in the biggest games, they got it handed to them, that honestly cost the Buckeyes a playoff shot. So, I don't know if I be honest with you, they lose like we talked about, they lose the Nebraska game or something like that. I mean, this squad gets an F and, like Eichenberg knows how to play the position just like Borland did. He just physically he's not at the level of he's not an NFL linebacker. And I think if you ask me, Ohio State should have one NFL linebacker on the team at all times. I don't understand, again, the recruiting thing and the program thing, like to not even know who your linebackers are going to be going into next year. And you're probably going to be ranked top 3 in the country. Boggles my mind too. But they got a straight D, and again, that's probably as nice as I could be.
Jeff, there's one thing that jumped off the screen when I'm watching the national championship game, specifically looking at the Georgia Bulldogs. Their team speed, well, no, not two things. There's not two things, not one, two things. Their team speed, it's a different level. Also, not only their team speed, but they physically look healthier and bigger than Ohio State's defense. Now, think back to the 2020 season during COVID. Players were in Columbus and they had to go home. Then they went back to Columbus. You couldn't practice like normal. You couldn't watch film like normal. You couldn't hit. Like, I get like those limitations there leading up into the season. You have a season, you don't have a season. Like, that's mentally taxing, and that's going to affect how you work out and prepare in the offseason because you have no idea what's going to happen. Preparing for the season workout and training is different than traditional offseason workouts and training. But the team speed of Georgia and what we have seen from this year's Ohio State defense is light years difference.
There's
not a huge difference.
Yeah, it's not even. They're not even on the same. They're not even playing the same game.
No.
I think almost every Ohio State defender, especially the front seven, they almost all look like they're maybe 10 pounds lighter than they even need to be. I mean, just size wise, and we're not used to that. Those are questions that I've had all year, and I don't know the answer. Like nobody really discusses it or asks the question, but like it was just, and for the last few years, Ohio State was closing that gap. We've seen that. We've seen how they played, and then all of a sudden now it looks like this gap between Ohio State's mainly on defense and, like you say, Alabama or Georgia, like that gap's back, and I don't understand what the breakdown was in the conditioning, the training, the recruiting, all of it. I don't, I know we're being hard on these players. It's not their fault. They do what
No.
they're out there doing what they got to do, but we also just can't sit there and pat them on the back just because they wear the scarlet and gray, because that's how programs take a nosedive.
And that's what I'm afraid of, honestly. We'll talk more about Ryan Day towards the end of the month with giving him a grade for this year. But with what I have seen this year from this team, physically, how many guys consistently get injured, the team speed. There was a different level of team speed, even when Urban's guys weren't NFL guys. Like Joshua Perry, a good linebacker, good college linebacker, not an NFL linebacker, which is not a problem. Tyvis Powell, a really good college safety.
Yeah.
Didn't really pan out when he tried to play professionally, either in the CFL, Canadian Football League, or the NFL. Didn't really pan out. That's not a problem. But they also know there's a different level of speed if you're playing Big Ten football versus trying to win a national championship. Didn't see it this year. And it starts to me, and now it starts all over the field, but team speed was crazy lacking at linebacker. I can go defensive line team speed, secondary team speed. I can go all through it, but
across the board,
speed was huge. It was a problem. People love Mickey Mariotti, strength and conditioning program. Great. I have no allegiances to anybody right now. No allegiances to any coaches. I love Ryan Day, but if Ryan Day messes up, I could easily say, Ryan Day, it's time to go, buddy. Time to go find another coaching job in college football. I think it's he himself, Mickey Mariotti, with the strength and conditioning program, looking at the linebackers themselves. This is a wake-up call. Could be one of those things where it's like, I need to fix this. Now, me speaking as Mickey Mariotti, I need to fix something here because whatever we did leading up into the season and during the season did not work. These players, these coaches, these fans, this administration, they will not accept another subpar season. 2 losses back-to-back years, not acceptable. Not making the playoff next year, not beating Michigan, not winning the Big Ten, not acceptable. Nobody's off the hook. Mickey Mariotti, I believe, is still going to be here, and he can start linebackers. I mean, it's just a position, but the whole team, but specifically linebackers, team speed, he can start right there because that's not good. Jeff, D+, D for me for the D-line and linebackers, C and D for you for the D-line and linebackers. Jeff, for the defensive backs, this may be where I'm the nicest that I've ever been with grades. They get a C, a flat C. C as in cat. It all goes back to the defensive line, them not getting a pass rush or consistent pressure on the quarterback or even getting anything in the backfield. That hurts the secondary. I'm amazed that Cam Brown and Denzel Burke played as well as they did, even with the absence of Seven Banks at times. And Seven Banks wasn't healthy throughout the season. You could tell. I have to give them some credit for that. Like, if you're not getting a pass rush and they're playing good, okay, you guys are doing something a little bit different than other defensive backs out there. Corners, great. Josh Proctor goes down. Bryson Shaw was a liability. I'm being nice to Bryson Shaw. I've been mean to him all season. He was a liability. He's also a backup. So I have to take that into account as well. Of healthy Josh Proctor, I think this defense looks a lot different, even though there was a lack of speed. But a C for this team with the players that played, even the cover safety position with Marcus Williamson or Lathan Ransom or sometimes Cam Martinez. I'm still bad when I'm saying 3 guys at one position. I'm still amazed. They're playing so many guys. I'm being nice because they can only do so much if there's no pass rush and they're doing their job. There's a lot of good things going on. I can also say that the two of the top 3 tacklers are defensive backs in the secondary. Ronnie Hickman's a bright spot. 99 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack, 2 interceptions. He did have a pick 6 and 1 forced fumble. Bryson Shaw played in all 13 games, 59 tackles, a half of a tackle for loss, 1 interception, 3 pass breakups, 1 fumble recovery. I mean, just going to be honest with you, another bright spot, Denzel Burke, he had 12 pass breakups. Yeah. Take him off this defense, off the secondary, bro, they might be looking at a D themselves. But, I mean, the bright spots that are there, Burke, Brown, Hickman. I have no idea if Hickman even starts next year. Just going to be completely honest. But those are the main reasons why they're getting a C. Could have easily gone D minus, D plus, D minus with how they played this year.
Yeah, yeah, you nailed it, man. I'm on board with all that. Again, my first note was Burke was a bright spot. Like
Yeah.
from game one, that's when I really thought things would come together. So what Hickman did was really good and it helped, but he also, there were some deficiencies in pass coverage and actual pass coverage. But what he was asked to do and try to make up for the basically be a half linebacker, half safety without good safety, without safety help behind him, that without Proctor back there, he was in an impossible task. But he did the best out of it. So I give him full credit for that. Did a great job. But this overall, the safeties just didn't play the pass game very well. Like again, Banks was just, I know it's injury and it's not being there. And I'm not even sure, he might've had a week with COVID, like all this stuff. Essentially, he just never felt like he was really part of the team. Some of the other guys that you mentioned stepped up, which was cool. I was a little friendlier to him. I gave him a C plus, and basically for the exact reasons you said, is that they had all this pressure on them because if they didn't hold up, like they would have got, like the Purdue game, I mean, they gave up almost they might have gave up 500 yards passing,
It
and
was close.
still
No, they were like 4 something. It was close to
it's
500.
but it was still in a blowout. So it's like, okay, they didn't have that game like they did Indiana last year. Like the games that they lost this year were because they got pushed around up front. So I'm like, actually, the secondary held up a little better than last year to where they were just giving up 50-yard bombs left and right. So I'm like, I graded them on a curve. I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, it was a little better. The numbers aren't bad when you look at this defense's
No, they're
numbers.
not.
The numbers really aren't that bad, even though what you see with your eyeballs is different. But they didn't play a lot of great quarterbacks. But when they had a quarterback that everybody was worried about, whether it be Purdue, especially Michigan State, can't say enough about that game. Nebraska, they didn't let those teams. They didn't let those teams have those big, those 75-yard pass plays. I can remember one play, it was really a negative when they played Maryland, and Tagovailoa's got the guy wide open in the end zone and misses him. I still don't know how that game turns out if that's a complete pass. We'll never
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah.
things like that scared me, but overall they did enough. Even in the Rose Bowl, they did just enough to get the win. So I gave him a C plus. I hope Burke is continues on that path. If Burke and Hickman get better and they fix a couple other, this secondary can get a lot better really quick. If Proctor is the player that we have hoped he's going to be for about 3 years now, we've been talking about it. This secondary could get pretty good. I could see us next year saying they got to be this time
Yeah.
next year after we win the national championship.
Jeff, I want to ask you a question here quickly about, a couple things as we close up the show. Do you think Ronnie Hickman starts at the bullet position next year?
As of this second, yes.
Okay.
Just because, like you said, I don't know who the fill-ins are. I don't know who's coming through the portal. I think that's a good spot for him. We'll see. We'll see what they do with that position, but I think opening. Of course, for now we're talking about Notre Dame. We're playing a physical run team, so actually using the example of the team we're playing first, maybe not. I'm used to playing, say, Western Michigan or somebody to
Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
would be like, go out there and essentially. Now, here's what I will say, though. I have not studied a lot of Oklahoma State's defense to
Okay.
know what Knowles is going to do. So I don't know if it's going to look anything like what I expect. So as an honest answer, I haven't, I have quite a few months to study,
Yeah.
Oklahoma State style, but I do think Hickman is going to be in some sort of rover joker package. I believe that.
See, I'm curious about that because I don't know if Jim Knowles wants to go a little bit heftier
What
player at that position. Now, we talked about earlier, you mentioned that players look to be 10 pounds lighter. Let's say Hickman puts on about 10, maybe 15 pounds. He fits that role perfectly to me.
That's my hunch. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's what I'm going. I really think that's my prognosis or for him. I don't know if he comes back the same body type, you're right. I don't know. And maybe Knowles, like I've said it for a long time, I think that they could do more of a 3-3-5 situation to where that outside guy, that third rover or joker, whatever you want to call him. LSU calls him a joker. So I've always I studied a lot of
Same.
Ogeron's, over the years. So that's how I came up. That's why I say that if anybody wonders. But then they used a bigger guy. That's when they used more of your hybrid linebacker, defensive lineman. and that's a different way to do the defense. It's always up to the coordinator. Maybe they do both, because I still think there's an area where JTT could do some of that if he gets in the right physical shape. A guy like that maybe, or one of these linebackers. Kind of, Werner, he was able to bulk up a little bit in his last couple years and do some of that stuff. So if you talk about going big, then maybe that's how they go. But I do think that that spot Hickman will occupy the majority of the time early on, and then we'll see what happens.
And then also, looking ahead to this time next year, the national championship. I did a little talking. I think I was with Mo. I think it was with Mo last week. I was talking about how next year's national championship and build up and lead up into the season and all throughout, it could be the same type of build up where the '05 season, USC and Texas knew they were the two best teams before week number 1. They knew Matt Leinart and Vince Young were going to be the leaders of those teams. And they knew that it was a collision course. As long as both teams did their jobs, they were going to collide in the national championship at the end of the season. I was leaning towards Alabama to be that team next. Now, granted, Alabama didn't win the national championship. They were not the better team. If healthy, maybe, because John Mechie and Jamison Williams on the field.
Yeah, that was a tough blow.
But not having both those guys, one the entire game, and the other one you lose them early in the game after having 4 catches for 65 yards.
Yeah, that was worse. That was worse. Yeah, like that. I just want to touch on that real quick, since since I'm lucky enough to be on the show, and say, for all those who are comparing it to Stroud losing his 2 receivers, it's not the same. It's not apples and oranges. He didn't lose them in the middle of a game in a national championship game against a Georgia defense. So, what Young had to do without Williams is nothing like what Stroud had a week to prepare, basically a month to prepare without his receivers against a completely different defense. So, Young did what he could, and I thought the young receivers for Alabama did what they could, but they were not good enough for that Georgia defense. But that was a tough blow, and I hope Williams is okay, mainly.
Towards ACL, man. That's
I hadn't heard. See, this is new. I had not followed up on that. That's sad. But today's age, he'll be fine. He'll have to do a little more, and it's going to take him another year. But he'll be good. I hope.
Yes, he will. Yes, he will.
That stinks.
But do you think we can have this upcoming season, knowing how ESPN will want to promote the season, and how Fox, who may get the first game of the year, is going to want to promote that game, whoever gets it? Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Alabama, Ohio State, 2 brands, 2 amazing coaches in Ryan Day, Nick Saban, 2 guys that could win the Heisman in Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Go back to the '05 season. Matt Leinart won the Heisman in '04. The very next year it was Vince Young. Yeah. Was it Vince Young that year, or was it Reggie Bush? No, it was Reggie Bush '05.
Yeah, Reggie Bush won it. Vince Young remembers that very well.
Yes. And so I get like all those things, but I feel like we could get the build up. And I mean, this January 11th, I feel like starting in July, maybe June, you may get like Ohio State, Alabama collision course going to the national championship. 2 of the best quarterbacks, a quarterback in Stroud, who I've never seen a quarterback use this type of firepower and go internally to use the Michael Jordan type of slight against him or negative comment against him to fuel him. I can easily see the promoters promoting Ohio State, Alabama, end of the year, Stroud versus Bryce Young, Heisman race. These 2 guys meet wherever the national championship is played to play for all the marbles. I think that's realistic. Do you think that could possibly be the same type of buildup we had USC Texas '05 season?
I do, especially with all the changes that Day has made with the coaching staff. Because now, I think if nothing changed, then we would go into the season of, can Ohio State fix its defense? It'd be more like how they talked about the Oklahoma Sooners for the last 5 years.
Correct.
But I think with all the changes now you have all this like, everything's going to be different. We've seen them do this with Michigan for years. They've had a lot of coaches in and out of there, and some really good ones. And then when they bring a new one in, it's like, this is the year, this is it. And it did happen last year, but since all this, I think that takes away some of the question marks, and it's going to be so heavy quarterback driven. Next year it's got to be Stroud versus Young. It's just too easy. Both of them from where they're from, and just the similar stats, just everything. It's going to be that. So, and of course, Alabama's always going to be up there, and they should. They're going to have a really good team coming back next year, and Ohio State has the huge game to springboard them against Notre Dame, which we found out this year. ask Cincinnati, if you beat Notre Dame, you got a path to the national championship. So assuming they get through Notre Dame, I definitely think they're gonna, and they're always gonna prop Ohio State up to fail too. Let's face it. They love the upset too. So no matter what, they're gonna put Ohio State as high as they can. So that way people watch every week to see them win or see them lose.
Think about this though. Like at '05 season, Texas played Ohio State that year, early in the
Mm-hmm.
year. I
I
think
I
Ohio State had a chance to win that game.
I hate
So
that game so much.
I'll rewatch it sometime soon. We may have to talk about it just to relive the horror of what that night was. But it's the same type of thing. Like Notre Dame and like these are two brands right now that move the needle more than almost
Yeah.
any other school
Oh, yeah.
outside of Alabama. I don't, and it still might be Notre Dame and Ohio State and everybody else as far as moving the needle in college football. At that time, it was Ohio State, Texas,
Oh,
USC. Those were the schools that moved the needle the most. We might get that early in the year, some fireworks in Columbus when the Fighting Irish. I really hope Marcus Freeman stops talking. I wasn't planning on doing this, but if he keeps talking, I'm being nice, but if he keeps going off and making these comments, sprinkle in a little truth, make an absurd comment at the beginning, like stop, just stop.
yeah.
I'm gonna get off
I
my.
didn't think that would be his style. I think
No,
I hope he comes off. I don't like, that's a weird way to start your coaching career.
very weird, very weird.
Very atypical of him. So, I don't know. Maybe he's trying to distract people or throw them off the scent. Remember when Harbaugh started at Michigan? He was nuts. He was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Maybe he's trying to throw people off the scent. Like, man, don't take this guy serious. Then he brings a yeah, a locomotive into Columbus next year. I don't know, but I like Freeman too much to have him do these hijinks right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Jeff Hunt from the Off the Ball Network. Thank you so much for coming on, going through some more grades for us for this Ohio State defense. If you could, let the good people know where they can catch you on Twitter and where they can catch all the good stuff going on at the Off the Ball Network.
Yeah, appreciate it as always, Jay, and the Locked On Network. I love it. Love the show. Love the setup. Yeah, very, very professional over there at Locked On. This is a great time. Yeah, you can find me at Jeff Needs Sports. That's my podcast. Got a lot of crazy stuff coming up in the new year with football winding down. We're gonna do some entertainment stuff and some other things. You can find me on Twitter at JHunt006. I'd love to talk to you guys and discuss ideas and grades and rankings and all the other stuff I do. And of course, now it's new. We've moved the offtheballnetwork.com. Now it's offtheballnetwork.substack.com. So everything's on Substack now. Kind of align everything up, make it easier for the listeners and the viewers and everybody that reads the articles to get all their information from Off the Ball Network, at one time. So go check that out if you will. Subscribe, and we'll send our info right to you. So again, thanks, Jay. This is a pleasure, man. Even though we did have to talk about this defense.
No problem, guys. You can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. This is it for the show. We will be back tomorrow on Thursday. Those of you watching live, come back a day from now. We'll be back on Thursday talking basketball with Trey Demps from the Big Ten Network. Ohio State basketball rolling. They also have a big test on Thursday night against the Wisconsin Badgers. For Jeff Hunt from the Off the Ball Network, I am Jay Stevens. We're out. We'll be back next week with Jeff to talk more about some more grades for the Ohio State coaches this time.